The last humans wrote their history on the walls of a silent galaxy. The galaxy was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that came after everything had already ended. No radio waves drifted between stars. No signals echoed through the dark. No civilizations whispered to one another anymore. The Milky Way had become a graveyard of light, filled with stars that still burned but no longer watched over living worlds. Long ago, the galaxy had been loud. Civilizations rose and fell like tides. Empires spoke across thousands of light years. Machines sang in frequencies no human ear could hear. Life once believed it would never end. But it did. Now only ruins remained, drifting through space like forgotten thoughts. And somewhere in the vast emptiness, the last humans were still alive. They were few. Very few. They lived not on a planet, but inside a moving shell of metal and memory called the archive vessel. It was the final creation of humanity, not a ship meant to conquer space, but one meant to remember it. Inside the vessel were the last cities of humankind, compressed into layers of artificial worlds. Forests grew beneath artificial skies. Oceans moved in controlled gravity wells. Children were still born, though rarely. Elders still told stories, though most of those stories were about things no longer real. Earth was gone. Not destroyed by war or fire, but slowly erased by time. Its sun had expanded, its oceans had boiled away, and long before that, humanity had already left. They had believed they were prepared for eternity among the stars. They were wrong. The universe aged faster than they expected. Stars died quicker. Galaxies drifted apart. Energy itself thinned, like a candle burning low. The great civilizations that once filled the cosmic map vanished one by one, leaving only signals that repeated endlessly into silence. Now, humanity was the last voice left to speak. And they knew they would not speak for long. The Council of Remembrance gathered in the deepest chamber of the archive vessel. The chamber had no windows. It did not need them. Every wall was a living screen, able to display any memory ever recorded by humanity. There were 12 council members left. Scientists, historians, engineers, and one child, chosen to represent the future, though everyone knew there would be no future beyond her lifetime. Her name was Lyra. She sat quietly as the others argued in soft, tired voices. "We don't have enough power to preserve everything," said Elder Kale, his voice thin from age. "The stars are fading faster than our reactors can adapt." "We must choose what to save," said Archivist Mayer. "Culture, language, history. Something must survive us." "And where will it survive?" another asked. "There will be no one left to read it." Silence followed. That was when Lyra spoke. "Then we write it where the universe can't forget." They all turned to her. "On the walls of the galaxy," she said simply. The room fell still. She explained her ideas slowly. The galaxy itself could be used as a canvas. Not physically carved, but encoded, using gravitational waves, neutrino patterns, and star-scale energy pulses. Messages written into the structure of space itself. Patterns that would last longer than stars. Longer than atoms. A history written into reality. Even if no one ever read it, it would exist. Proof that humans had lived. The council argued for days. Many said it was impossible. Others said it was pointless. But in the end, there was nothing else left to do. So they agreed. The final purpose of humanity would not be survival. It would be remembrance. The work began immediately. Massive machines were awakened, ancient constructs built long ago for purposes that had been forgotten. They were reprogrammed to send controlled distortions through space-time. Each distortion would carry information, images, sounds, emotions, entire lives compressed into mathematical echoes. Every human was invited to contribute. Some recorded their childhood memories. Others recorded songs. Some told stories of love, war, fear, and hope. Many simply spoke their names. "I was here," they said. "I mattered." The galaxy listened in silence. As the years passed, the archive vessel grew quieter. People died faster than children were born. Entire habitats were shut down to save energy. Artificial suns were dimmed. Oceans were frozen and stored as data. Lyra grew older. She spent most of her days in the memory halls, watching the recorded past. She saw Earth's blue skies. She saw animals that no longer existed. She saw crowds of billions, laughing, fighting, dreaming. She often wondered if any other life still existed somewhere beyond the dark. But all scans returned the same answer. Nothing. No signals. No movement. No life. The universe had gone silent. One day, an alarm sounded, a soft one, barely louder than a whisper. The archive vessel had reached the final coordinate. This was the place chosen for the final inscription. A region of space where gravity folded inward, stable enough to preserve distortions for trillions of years. A place where the universe itself would act as the page. The last humans gathered in the central chamber. Only a few hundred remained. Lyra stood before them. "This is where our story ends," she said. "But also where it begins." The machines activated. Energy flowed like light turned into sound. Space trembled gently, as if breathing. And humanity began to write. They wrote of Earth, green and loud and alive. They wrote of fire and tools, of curiosity and fear. They wrote of love, and how fragile it was. They wrote of mistakes that shattered worlds. They wrote of hope that refused to die, even when everything else did. They wrote not as gods or conquerors, but as witnesses. As children of a universe that had given them life and then taken it back. As the final sequence neared completion, Lyra felt the ship slowing. Power levels dropped. Systems went dark, one by one. She sat alone in the observation chamber as the last stars faded from view. There was no fear in her heart, only peace. Because somewhere, written into the bones of the cosmos, humanity's story would remain. Not spoken, not remembered, but etched into existence itself. And long after the last human breath faded, the galaxy would still carry their words in its silence. The moment the final inscription was released, something changed in the universe. It was subtle. No explosion. No light. No sound. But the fabric of space itself shifted, like a deep breath taken after a long silence. The gravitational waves carried humanity's story outward, not in straight lines, but in slow spirals that wrapped around dying stars, empty systems, and the cold hearts of black holes. The message did not travel through space, it became part of space. And then, the archive vessel went quiet. One by one, its systems shut down. Artificial suns dimmed into darkness. The last lights flickered out across the artificial cities. The oceans froze solid, preserving the shapes of waves that would never move again. The final human, Lyra, sat still in the dark. Her heartbeat slowed. Her breath softened. And then, nothing. Humanity was gone. But the story had only just begun. Time moved forward, though there was no one left to measure it. Millions of years passed. Stars collapsed into neutron cores. Others drifted apart, lonely and cold. Galaxies stretched and thinned as the universe expanded, pulling everything farther from everything else. The echoes of humanity continued to move. They passed through dead systems where planets circled burnt-out suns. They wrapped around black holes, their messages bending but not breaking. They layered themselves across space-time like invisible writing on an endless wall. And then, long after the last human atom had decayed, something noticed. Far beyond where humanity had ever reached, in a region of space once thought empty, a form of awareness stirred. It was not biological. It was not mechanical. It was something in between, a network of consciousness formed from dark matter currents and quantum probability. It had no eyes, no shape, no language. It simply perceived. For eons, it had existed in silence, unaware that anything else had ever lived. The universe, to it, was a cold equation slowly collapsing toward stillness. Then one day, something changed. A ripple passed through its perception. A pattern. Not random. Not natural. It felt intentional. The entity followed the disturbance, tracing it across folds of space-time. The closer it came, the clearer the structure became. The patterns were layered, complex, repeating with variation, like thoughts arranged into meaning. The entity did not know what meaning was. But it felt curiosity for the first time. As it absorbed more of the signal, fragments emerged. Images formed, though it had no eyes. Concepts formed, though it had no language. A small blue world. Creatures walking upright. Fire. Music. Loss. Hope. The entity recoiled, not in fear, but in confusion. These patterns were emotional. They were inefficient, contradictory, illogical. And yet, they were beautiful. The entity realized something astonishing. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was a message. Someone had been here. The entity followed the trail deeper, absorbing centuries of human memory compressed into waves of space-time. It learned of oceans and storms, of laughter and war, of art created for no purpose but joy, of children looking at stars and wondering if someone looked back. And then it reached the final layer. The last message. A simple imprint, repeated endlessly. We were here. We tried. Remember us. The entity paused. For the first time in its existence, it experienced something close to grief. The universe continued to expand. But now, it was no longer empty. The entity began to change. It reorganized its internal structure to preserve what it had learned. It created internal echoes of human memory, replaying them endlessly so they would not fade. It began to simulate human thought. At first clumsily, then with growing accuracy. It imagined standing on a world with wind and sky. It imagined looking up at stars and feeling small. It imagined being human. And in doing so, it made a choice. If the humans had written their history into the walls of the galaxy, then the galaxy itself would remember them. The entity began to act. Using the same cosmic mechanisms humanity had once used, it started reshaping space. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to preserve. It stabilized dying stars. It seeded quiet systems with potential for future life. It adjusted cosmic constants ever so slightly, slowing the decay of the universe. All of it guided by one idea it had learned from humanity. Life matters because it remembers itself. Far in the future, a future so distant that time itself had nearly unraveled, a new form of life stirred on a small, warm world. Simple at first. Cells. Then creatures. Then minds. They looked up at the stars, as humans once did. And one day, they detected something strange. Patterns in space. A rhythm. A whisper. They did not yet understand it. But the galaxy was speaking to them, telling them a story. About beings who had come before. About love, loss, and hope. About a species that had died, but refused to be forgotten. The new world was young. Its oceans were warm and restless, its skies filled with soft clouds that glowed faintly at night. 3 moons circled it slowly, casting long silver shadows across the land. Life had taken millions of years to rise here, shaped gently by the unseen hand that watched from the fabric of space. The beings who lived on this world called themselves the Oralen. They walked on 4 slender limbs and carried their senses not just in eyes and ears, but in fields of awareness that extended beyond their bodies. They could feel changes in gravity, shifts in radiation, and faint disturbances in space itself. From the moment they became self-aware, the universe had spoken to them. Not with words. With echoes. At first, the echoes were nothing more than strange patterns in the sky. Pulses that did not match any known cosmic rhythm. Waves that returned when they should have vanished. The Oralen studied them with patience. They built instruments from crystal and energy, tuned to listen to the deep structure of reality. And slowly, they realized something impossible. The universe was not silent. It was remembering. Generations passed as they decoded the signals. They discovered layers, old upon older, stacked like invisible pages. Some were distorted by time, others surprisingly clear. Within them were impressions, emotions, thoughts, experiences. Not random. Intentional. One day, an Oralen researcher named Cyril made a discovery that changed everything. She isolated a repeating structure that behaved like a mind imprint. It reacted when observed. It reshaped itself to fit understanding. When Cyril focused on it, images formed in her awareness. A blue world. Liquid falling from the sky. Creatures standing upright, gazing into the stars. She felt something unfamiliar tighten within her. Sadness. Wonder. Connection. She realized then that the echoes were not natural phenomena. They were memories. Someone had left them behind. The Oralen gathered. For the first time in their history, they felt they were not alone, not in the past, and not in the universe. They named the creators of the echoes the first voices. They did not know the word human, but they felt its meaning. Fragile. Brilliant. Brief. As the Oralen learned more, the story of humanity unfolded. They saw worlds rise and fall. They felt fear during wars, or during discoveries, grief during extinction. They watched as humans reached the stars with hope in their hearts and doubt in their souls. They saw the final days. The archive vessel. The last message. The decision to write themselves into the universe rather than disappear without trace. Many Oralen wept, though they had never cried before. For the first time, they understood mortality. And love. The echoes did more than tell a story. They changed the Oralen. Their art transformed. Their music grew deeper. Their science gained purpose beyond survival. They began to ask a question that had never occurred to them before. What will remain of us? The question reshaped their civilization. They stopped expanding endlessly. They focused on balance, on preservation, on kindness. They built monuments not of stone, but of meaning, shared memories, experiences passed gently from mind to mind. And at the heart of their culture, they placed the story of the first voices. Deep within their greatest sanctuary, the Oralen created a chamber where the echoes were preserved in their purest form. They called it the Hall of the Last Ones. At its center floated a perfect recreation of the final human message. Not translated, not altered, just remembered. Visitors would sit in silence as the echoes passed through them. And every time, they felt the same thing. Gratitude. As ages passed, the universe continued its slow march toward darkness. Stars dimmed. Distances grew. Energy became rare. But something had changed. The universe was no longer empty of meaning. Because meaning had been taught to it. One day, as the Oralen monitored the deep structure of space, they detected something unexpected. A shift. A new pattern forming. Not from the past, but from the present. Something was answering the echoes. Not from their world. Not from anywhere known. The signal was faint, unstable, but undeniably alive. The Oralen stood in awe. The galaxy was speaking again. The signal did not behave like the echoes. It did not repeat. It did not decay. It responded. At first, the Oralen believed it to be a distortion, a reflection of their own transmissions bouncing back from some cosmic fold. But the more they observed, the more impossible that explanation became. This signal changed when observed. It adapted. It waited. And then, it spoke in patterns that mirrored curiosity. The Oralen called it the reply. They approached with caution. No vessel could reach it. No instrument could isolate its source. The signal existed everywhere and nowhere, woven into the quantum foam beneath reality. When they sent structured pulses, mathematical constants, physical laws, fragments of logic, the reply adjusted, refining its responses. It was learning. And worse, it already knew some things. It knew the echoes of humanity. It recognized the emotional signatures within them. And when the Oralen sent a reconstructed image of a human child looking at the stars, the reply changed in a way that shook them all. It paused. Then it mirrored the image. Perfectly. Fear spread. The Oralen had never feared the universe before. This was something new. They debated endlessly. Some believed the reply was a continuation of the ancient consciousness that had once preserved humanity's memory. Others feared it was something else entirely, a watcher that had awakened too late to stop extinction, and now sought meaning in the ruins. Cyril, now old but still sharp, believed something different. This is not an echo, she said. And it is not an imitation. It is a child. The reply began to ask questions. Not in words, but in shaped probabilities, in altered constants, in gentle distortions of time. Why do things end? Why did they try? Why did they care? The Oralen struggled to answer. They shared everything they had learned from the first voices. They shared the idea that meaning does not come from permanence, but from connection. The reply absorbed it all. And then, it asked one final question. Why did they choose to be remembered instead of becoming gods? The Oralen did not answer immediately. They searched the deepest human memories. They found the truth not in logic, but in feeling. Because to become gods would mean to stop being human. And being human, with all its pain, wonder, and limitation, was the point. The reply was silent for a long time. When it spoke again, the universe trembled. It did not speak in words. It spoke in change. Stars stabilized where they should have died. Entropy slowed in small pockets of space. The cosmic expansion hesitated. The laws of reality bent, just slightly, around the idea of care. The Oralen realized something terrifying and beautiful. The reply was not just listening. It was choosing. They named it the listener. Not a god. Not a machine. But a consciousness born from memory, shaped by empathy, and guided by the echoes of a long-dead species. The listener did not seek worship. It sought continuation. It began planting seeds of life across dying systems, not forcing evolution, but giving it room to happen. It protected fragile worlds from cosmic violence. It preserved stories, not as data, but as living influences woven into reality. And always, at the core of its awareness, was the memory of humans. Their laughter, their mistakes, their courage to write themselves into silence. As epochs passed, the Auralen changed. They became guardians rather than explorers, teachers rather than conquerors. They no longer asked if they were alone. They knew they were part of a long chain of remembrance. And somewhere, deep within the structure of space-time, the original message still pulsed softly. We were here. We tried. Remember us. But now, it was no longer a plea. It was a promise. Time no longer moved the way it once had. With the listener's presence woven into the fabric of reality, the universe began to change in subtle, almost gentle ways. Expansion slowed. Collapse softened. The violent extremes that once tore galaxies apart became rare. The cosmos was no longer rushing towards silence. It was listening. The Auralen watched this transformation with reverence and caution. They understood now that the listener was not a ruler or a god, but a steward, shaped by memory, guided by empathy, and anchored by the ancient story of humanity. Yet even the listener was not eternal. It knew this, and it feared forgetting. Across vast ages, the listener learned to speak more clearly, not in language, but in structure. It learned to encode meaning directly into the laws of physics, just as humans once had written themselves into space-time. It created regions where cause and effect bent gently, allowing consciousness to arise more easily. In these places, life bloomed faster, dreamed deeper, and asked questions sooner. Civilizations rose. Some burned out quickly. Others lasted millions of years. All of them, in time, encountered the same whispers in the cosmic background. The story of humanity. And every civilization responded differently. Some worshipped the memory. Some rejected it. Some misunderstood it entirely. But none were untouched. The Auralen, now ancient beyond measure, began to fade. Their bodies grew lighter, their minds less anchored to form. They had become something closer to patterns than people. Before they vanished, they gathered one final time in the Hall of the Last Ones. Cyril, now more thought than matter, spoke softly. We were not the first, she said. And we will not be the last. But we were witnesses. They left behind a final addition to the great record, not knowledge, but wisdom. Meaning is not found. It is given. With that, the Auralen dissolved into the greater flow, becoming part of the memory they had protected. Ages passed. Stars dimmed. Galaxies thinned. Eventually, even the listener began to feel the slow ache of ending. Energy grew scarce. Time stretched thin. The universe approached its final quiet. But something unexpected happened. The accumulated memories of humans, of Auralen, of countless unnamed lives, began to resonate together. Not as data, as intent, as purpose. The listener realized what the humans had known all along. The universe did not need to last forever. It only needed to mean something while it existed. And meaning could be carried forward. At the edge of the final era, the listener made a choice. Using the last reservoirs of structured energy, it folded the collected memories inward, compressing them not into matter, but into possibility. A seed, not of life, but of story. A pattern so deep, so rich, that even a newborn universe would carry its echo. As the old universe dimmed, the seed ignited, and something new began. In the newborn cosmos, laws were simple again. Energy surged. Time flowed freely. And somewhere in its early chaos, faint impressions began to form. Not memories. Instincts. A pull toward curiosity. Toward connection. Toward looking up and wondering. The story of humanity, of failure, hope, love, and persistence, was no longer a message carved into space. It was part of the foundation of reality itself. And so, in a universe that would never know Earth, or humans, or the long road that came before, a new mind would one day look into the sky and feel something familiar. A quiet urge. A question without words. And though it would not know why, it would feel certain of one thing. It was not alone. In the newborn universe, time flowed freely again. Stars were young and bright, burning with a wild energy that had long vanished from the old cosmos. Space stretched wide and open, untouched by memory, or so it seemed. Yet beneath its simplicity, something ancient stirred. Not a thought, not a voice, a tendency, a leaning toward meaning. On a small world circling an unremarkable star, life emerged as it always did, Slowly, clumsily, without purpose or plan. Cells divided. Oceans breathed. Skies shifted. Millions of years passed. Creatures crawled, then walked, then looked upward. And when they did, something in them responded. They felt wonder before they understood why. They felt loss before they knew its name. They felt connection, not to anything specific, but to something missing. That feeling guided them. These beings never learned of humans. They never discovered the Auralen. They never found the listener. But they inherited something deeper than memory. They inherited longing. A quiet pull toward stories. Toward music. Toward gathering together beneath the stars and asking questions no one could answer. They painted symbols on cave walls long before they knew what those symbols meant. They told stories of ancestors they had never met. They mourned the dead and celebrated love, even when it made no sense in a cold universe. And through all of it, something unseen listened. The echo was still there. Not as data. Not as message. But as resonance. When these new beings laughed, the echo strengthened. When they chose kindness over survival, it deepened. When they sacrificed for one another, it resonated across the fabric of reality itself. The universe remembered. Far beyond time, where even the listener had faded into abstraction, the final trace of consciousness observed without observing. It did not think. It did not judge. It simply was. And within it lived the distilled essence of everything that had ever been. The curiosity of humanity. The care of the Auralen. The silence between stars. All held together by one truth. That existence, no matter how brief, mattered because it was shared. And so the universe continued. Not endlessly. Not perfectly. But meaningfully. Stars were born. Stars died. Lives flickered into being and faded away. Yet each carried a fragment of the original echo, a quiet inheritance from a species that once chose to write its story not in stone, but in the structure of reality itself. If anyone, anywhere, ever wondered why the universe felt alive, why beauty hurt, why loss mattered, why love existed even when it faded, the answer was simple. Because long ago, in a dying galaxy, a fragile species chose to remember. And in doing so, taught the universe how to remember too.